At the European Parliament in Brussels, there are 23 official languages.
Имаше възможност с него да дискутираме в рамките на този форум.
When the European Union was first established, the dominant languages were French and German, but that has now changed.
All languages are equal, but to coin a phrase, some are probably more equal than others. Our official line is very definitely that all languages are equal, but there's no point denying the fact that English is becoming more used and therefore more valued, I would say, but officially not at all.
I would like to reiterate in this regard that the European Parliament supports that
English has become dominant. Pretty much everybody who wants to have some kind of a role and function, and above all influence, will know English.
La question fondamentale, à mon avis, qui se pose, c'est est-ce qu'on peut gouverner 500 millions de personnes qui parlent 22 langues avec une seule langue? Ma réponse est définitivement non, c'est impossible.
In practice, there certainly has been a very big change. It began, I think, in 1995 when Sweden and Finland joined the European Union, because they really brought with them a tradition of learning English and speaking English. And that was something which was confirmed then in 2004 with a very big enlargement to Eastern Europe. The staff that came with those countries tended to be English speaking as a second language rather than French speaking, and that really just tipped the balance.
Exactly.
And our office is in contact.
The role of English is mainly that of a lingua franca, which means that it is a means of communication for people for whom this is the best language of communication. Doesn't mean that everybody is at the same level of English. It doesn't even mean that everybody is happy to choose English, but if it is the only means of communication that everybody shares, then that's what you call English as a lingua franca.
Je ne vois pas comment on pourrait arrêter à court terme cette domination, je dirais même cette hégémonie de la langue anglaise. À 27 pays, il faut une lingua franca. Cette lingua franca, pour l'instant, est l'anglais. Qu'on s'en réjouisse ou qu'on le regrette. C'est que l'Union européenne, c'est une fédération dans un certain nombre de domaines. Or, on ne peut pas diriger cette fédération dans une autre langue que les différentes langues parlées par les citoyens. Sinon, ça porte un nom. C'est du colonialisme, c'est un empire, et l'Union européenne, évidemment, ne peut pas fonctionner de cette façon-là. Donc, je considère que l'anglais n'est pas une menace pour le français, mais c'est une menace pour la légitimité de l'Union européenne.
If someone is speaking English, let's say, imperfectly, first of all, the interpreters have to try to work out what that person actually is trying to say before they can then go on to the process of converting it into Spanish, into Portuguese, into Greek, into whatever. So it adds an extra step, it adds an extra difficulty. Interpreters always prefer it when people speak their native language. It's much easier for us and for our work, because then people are speaking naturally, they're saying what they want to say, they're much more expressive, and if someone's English is limited, then they can only say those things. And sometimes they don't actually say what they mean to say. Just a little example, I was at a meeting where a woman said, "I'm glad you took your time to get here." She meant, "I'm glad you took the time to get here." It's a very small thing, but it actually makes a difference. And it means the interpreters have to do a lot more work on understanding the context and on trying to decipher what it is that person means to say rather than what it is they're actually saying.
Some academics believe it's time to take a completely different approach to the dominance of English in Europe.
I think what we really need is some innovative thinking about the linguistic landscape in Europe, if you like, because this is an unprecedented situation that we have this growth and spread of one language. And I think instead of adhering to this notion of one nation, one state, one language, which is so deeply ingrained in Europe because of our 19th century nationalism. We've invested so much into creating nations that are somehow defined by their languages, and languages are so intricately bound up with culture. And the way forward for me would be to conceptualize English differently, so that you take it out of this hierarchy of languages that we have. But if you take English out of this hierarchy and say, okay, English we take for granted anyway, it's something like a driving license. You know, it's something that everybody has. It's nothing special, but without it you don't get very far, if you like. Then if you take English out of this hierarchy, then it will be interesting to decide which other languages you might want to learn, but you would learn them for very different reasons. Because you love Italian music, or because you like French food and have French friends and things like that.
This is not a view shared by the critics of the rise of English in Europe.
Une autre question, et c'est celle-là qui préoccupe à mon avis les Français, est de savoir quelle influence a le langage sur l'expression des idées. Or, on ne peut manquer de remarquer que depuis 10, 15 ans, 20 ans, au moment où l'anglais s'est imposé comme langue commune, l'Europe est devenue de plus en plus libérale. Donc des valeurs qui ne sont pas les valeurs continentales. Parce qu'un langage, une langue n'est pas neutre. Une langue véhicule des valeurs. Et c'est cela qui est préoccupant.
There's another aspect to the rise of English in Europe which has attracted attention. Is a new variety of English emerging? Something which can be called Euro-English? There are a range of views on this subject.
I think in different contexts means different things to different people. So on the one hand, it's sometimes used to designate the English that's used within European institutions, a kind of difficult to understand register that is used in the corridors of Brussels, where people use certain terms that are very difficult to understand for the average European citizen, such as subsidiarity and all these. And I think there are actually glossaries of terms that the European Union uses in a way that the most English native speakers would not normally understand. So that's one very special use of the term. It's also used more generally in a sense that people say, okay, Europe is most of Europe is now a union, and surely a union has a shared language, and therefore there will be shared features. It's easy to understand why people would have this expectation, but you must bear in mind that there are very many different European languages, and depending on the combination of speakers that use English as a lingua franca, this English will vary quite a bit.
The question of whether one standard version of Euro-English is arising or evolving, I think is quite a complicated one, and I don't know what the answer is. I'm tempted to think that there are certain words which are being adopted through being heard by other members. An example is foreseen. A member might say, or anyone working in the European environment might say, well, we're going to have to work through this meeting all morning, but unfortunately coffee is not foreseen, meaning coffee is not provided. And because in a number of languages like French or Dutch, prévu, voorzien, that word is used, it's become part of this Euro-English, which is then adopted by more and more people. And it just then, you almost find yourself saying it yourself. In fact, I have heard native English speakers in this context saying that. So gradually, inevitably, that process is occurring.
There is a truth in it to some extent. The English that people speak here, if they're not native English speakers, is different from the English that we would use as native speakers. But for me, it's not coalescing into a Euro-English. The Germans speak English in a German way, the French speak it in a French way. But what you will see, you'll see English used in what we would deem an incorrect fashion. But it's accepted by everybody because everybody understands it.
Sometimes I think that certain tendencies are emerging, certain lexis, but then that could just be the kind of lexis that you have in any job, any profession where a lot of people are together and they're initiated into it and they use their own vocabulary, their own jargon, if you like. So I suppose you have to be careful to draw a distinction between normal jargon in any place of work and a new language.
In a sense, I think Euro-English has arrived. I think its contours are difficult to define. Probably its grammar doesn't really correspond to English. I suspect that subtleties of things like to take on, to take off, to take to, the infinite variations which you can get from just a tiny switch in English, that escapes most of them. So in many ways it's a simple, some ways even a very crude language, but effective. And it's a very effective English second language communication, which I think in a sense is what we're talking about. It won't go away. I mean, I think it's here to stay. And I would be fascinated to see what it looks like, let's say 30 years from now. And it may be that native English speakers will have to learn it.
J'ajouterais que les Britanniques ou les Américains ne doivent pas trop se réjouir de cette domination de la langue anglaise au sein du Parlement européen ou des institutions communautaires. Parce que l'anglais qu'on parle ici est un anglais qui est à peine compréhensible pour un native English speaker. Pourquoi? Parce que c'est du globish que l'on parle ici. Très souvent, moi j'adore à Bruxelles, lorsque l'on parle anglais, moi-même je m'y amuse à parler anglais, on voit les Britanniques souffrir horriblement car leur langue en réalité est violée tous les jours.